can't remember if I have told this story before in a homily, so if I have, sorry, I guess. But when I was in seminary, about halfway through my time in seminary, my classmates and I had an opportunity to go on a 30-day silent retreat, much like a little over a year ago Father Novak went on. And so my classmates and I, we all drove from our seminary in Denver, and we drove to this retreat center in Iowa, in kind of the middle of nowhere, out in the woods. And we spent 30 days in silence and in prayer, working our way through the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius. And one of the things that we were required to do every day was to spend about either 4 or 5 hours, hour-long periods each day in prayer, an intentional time of quiet prayer with the Lord, and speaking with Him, listening to Him, and that intentional time of prayer and discernment. And so one day, maybe halfway through my retreat or somewhere around there, I was sitting in my room, and I began one of those periods of prayer. And I sat down in the chair that I had in my room that I would pray in, and I began to enter into this reflection and prayer. And I felt this pull, this tug, that I needed to, instead of, for that prayer period, instead of sitting in my chair praying, that I needed to go out and I needed to take a walk. And so I put on my shoes and I left my room and went out into the woods and just started going for a walk and following this one particular trail that I hadn't ever followed before. And I came to this fork in the path, right? This fork in the trail, and I looked right, and the trail kind of went into this kind of glade area, like a little clearing. The sun was coming down through the trees. It looked very inviting. In my memory, there was like a family of deer prancing around, playing. Who knows if that was actually true, but that's how I remember it, right? And then I looked left, and the trail went downhill, and there were rocks coming over the trail and spider webs across the rocks and darkness and maybe a storm cloud with some lightning or something, like a scene in Snow White when you see the evil queen's castle and it's just darkness and gloom, right? And so that's what I saw left, and I was looking at these two things, and I was I really want to go there, but something just told me I need to go there, and I was convinced that if I went that way, something amazing was going to happen, right? Something really awesome and powerful. I was going to have this really intense moment of grace from the Lord, right? And so I went, and I went down through the rocks, and I kept following this trail, and I kept following the trail, and I kept following the trail. And after about 45 minutes of just following this trail that was seemingly going nowhere except out into the void, I got frustrated because I was expecting this amazing grace from the Lord. I was expecting this powerful moment of consolation. And so being out there in the woods alone, I was frustrated, and I looked up to heaven and out loud said, "Lord, what is the point of this?" And it was one of the only times in my life that I've ever heard the Lord speak to me in specific words. Right? And He said, "The point is to be with me. The point is to be with me." I think my experience during that walk was an experience that I think a lot of us have, right? We expect that when we show up to prayer, that something amazing is going to happen every single time, right? We expect that we're going to walk in and we're going to say, Lord, here I am, transform me. And that the Lord, in that 15 minutes to an hour that we spend in prayer, is going to completely transform our life. And we're going to walk out a saint. Has anyone ever had that experience? Because if so, I would love to talk to you about it. But I don't think a single one of us has ever had that experience, right? The transformation that we receive in prayer is something that happens very slowly over time. And most of the time, in one time of prayer and one moment of prayer, we don't experience that, right? We don't always experience powerful consolations from the Lord in our prayer. But we expect, I think, in many ways to show up, and if we show up, then if I show up to prayer, I'm going to be able to somehow draw out of that prayer some amount of holiness and like shove it into my heart so that now I'll be a saint, right? Jesus gives us today this beautiful parable of the seed, right? And the farmer who sows the seed, right? Who takes the time to go out and to throw the seed on the ground and to kind of do some work in preparing the soil a little bit, right? And watering it with kind of some consistency, right? But then Jesus reminds the people, he reminds us, right? The man goes and he scatters the seed, and then he sleeps, and then he rises night and day, and he just continues doing this, right? And then he says, and through it all the seed would sprout and grow, he knows not how. First the blade, then the ear, then the full grain in the ear, right? He knows not how. Of its own accord, the land yields fruit. This is an important reminder to us that the work of transformation in our hearts, the work of growth, happens primarily through him. He's the one that makes us holy. We know not how. Our job, so to speak, our part, is to show up, to open our hearts, and then to kind of let the Lord do what he will. And in his own way and in his own time, the Lord will transform us. The Lord will make us holy. The Lord will make us into the saints that we're called to be. But so many times, I know in my life, I've shown up to prayer. I've said, all right, I'm going to show up. I'm going to open myself to the Lord. I'm going to allow him to transform me. And then after about 2 or 3 days or hours or minutes or seconds, nothing seems to be happening. And so I get frustrated. I get frustrated with myself. I get frustrated with the Lord. I get frustrated with the whole situation, right? And I give up, right? And I just say, what's the point of all of this, right? But the point is to be with him. Because if we're with him, then his grace is going to work in our lives. If we're with him, that means that he is with us. And if he is with us, all things are possible. If he is with us, then we are necessarily going to grow closer to him. If he is with us, we're necessarily going to become holier. But we have to be patient, right? Because the Lord's not always bound by our time, right? The Lord works in his own way and in his own time, and most of the time, not in the ways and the times that we expect. So today, as we come to Jesus and receive him in the sacrament, we ask for the grace of patience in our spiritual life. The grace to allow him in his time and in his way to come and to transform us and to make us holy. And we ask also for the grace of perseverance and fidelity in our prayer. that we can continue to show up even in times of discouragement, especially in times of discouragement, so that we can be with him and he can be with us, and he can draw us through those times of discouragement into times of consolation and joy. Right? And little by little, in his own way and in his own time, he can turn us into the saints that we're called to be.